Good evening. My name is Megan Miller, and I'm a Kevin B. Harrington Student Ambassador. On behalf of the faculty, staff, and students at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College, I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us for this evening's event. The Institute's mission is to educate, engage, and empower citizens of all ages to actively participate in the civic and political life of their communities and strengthen democracy. The Institute is nonpartisan and does not endorse political issues or candidates. Before we begin this evening's program, I would just like to remind you to turn off any cell phones or other devices that make noise. Tonight, Professor Kyle Hubbard will be introducing our speaker, Dr. Max Bazerman. Professor Hubbard is an assistant professor of philosophy, specializing in business ethics here at St. Anselm College. He also serves as an advisor to the Ethics and Governance Forum. Following Dr. Bazerman's remarks, we will have a brief question and answer period. Please wait until the student ambassador with the microphone reaches you before beginning your question. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Kyle Hubbard.
Thank you, and welcome to the first Ethics and Governance Forum speaker for this year. We typically have 4 of these throughout the year. The next one will be in November. What's the date, Ann? November, do you know it off the top of your head?
15th, I believe.
November 15th. So if you're on the email list, you'll get information about the next speaker. The Ethics and Governance Forum exists and has been charged, we have a charge from the state of New Hampshire to try to cultivate ethics in business governance, ethics in public policy in the state of New Hampshire. And we know that leadership has a whole lot to do with that. And that's why we've invited Dr. Max Bazerman tonight, who's going to speak to us specifically about leadership, about the ethics of leadership. Dr. Bazerman is the Jesse Isidor Straus Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School and co-director of the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's got a whole host of books, articles. I think I read the author, co-author, co-editor of at least 20 books, over 200 articles. So he has a lot of experience and a lot of advice and expertise in this area of ethics and leadership, and we welcome him. So if you can give him a warm St. Anselm welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Hubbard.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'm going to be talking about noticing, and what that means will become clear. I'm going to be talking about noticing ethics, and I'm going to be arguing that to be an excellent leader, you need to notice more effectively. And I tell you that while also admitting to you I'm quite lousy at noticing. Never been particularly observant. I'm pretty good at being focused. But more on that a little bit later. I'm going to start by focusing on what I consider to be one of my enormous failures in this unethical behavior. Then I'm going to be turning to some problems to get your help in solving, and then I'll be returning to some issues and connecting it to leadership as we go. So I want to tell you a little bit about a court case. Now, I'm not a lawyer. And as of 1999, I didn't know very much about this court case, but I become involved in it, and I'm going to be telling you about my journey. But as background, in 1999, the U.S. Department of Justice sued the tobacco industry. So not a specific company, but they filed a suit against basically the entire industry. And they filed it under something called RICO. Now, RICO refers to racketeering laws, and RICO was created so the government could go after the mafia when the mafia had a significant effect on organizations in our country. And Congress passed RICO to create an opportunity to not only punish companies for wrongdoing, but in extraordinary circumstances, to potentially take over those organizations, root out corruption, and then reprivatize them. Anyhow, in 1999, the U.S. Department of Justice decided to use RICO to go after the tobacco industry. Now, to win under RICO, you have to not only prove that fraud has been committed, you have to show that the fraud has been committed through a conspiracy. And here are the frauds that the tobacco industry was accused of in this case. Again, as of 1999, I knew little to nothing about this case. But basically what you'll see is doing something bad while then committing fraud by denying doing so. So these are basically selling addictive substances while denying doing so. And the denying doing so is what turns it into a fraud. And they were also accused of doing this through a conspiracy across all the organizations in the tobacco industry. Now, court cases in the U.S. can take a little bit long to get started, so this case doesn't actually start in the courtroom until September 2004. And by early 2005, the lawyers for the DOJ thought that they were winning. They were very happy about their case. But there was a decision made by an appeals court that basically said that the remedy that they were seeking, or the punishment that they were seeking, was inconsistent with RICO. Because RICO is created to root out future corruption. And the main penalty that the Department of Justice was seeking was $280 billion to pay for all the government costs associated with treating smoking that was created as a result of these frauds. And the appeals court argued that the Department of Justice, while they could continue their suit, they couldn't go after the main penalty that they had been requesting, which was payment for all the costs to the government as a result of these frauds. So the Department of Justice found itself in the interesting position of thinking it was winning the case, but being told they couldn't go after the main penalty it was seeking. And that led a young attorney who was part of the team to find me. And he found me because I had written a fair amount about the psychology of executives in ethical contexts, and I had also had a record for speaking out against other companies that I argued to do bad things. This dialogue led the Department of Justice to hire me on March 10th, 2005, and my job was to quickly write a report because they were behind, because they were planning on pursuing a different set of remedies. So I had 11 days to create my report. And my report basically talked about a variety of ways in which I predicted that absent strong action by the court, that unethical conduct would continue in the future. And my recommendations concluded with the argument that absent significant court intervention, misconduct would occur in the future. My recommendation to the court, based on the assumption that the DOJ had proven liability, because my job was not to prove liability, but to discuss the remedy or punishment, was that the court should appoint monitors to the tobacco companies to consider appropriate structural changes, not limited to, but including the removal of senior management. Now, it's that last line that keeps you from being popular in the tobacco industry. And this was part of my report. Now, I want to share with you the timeline of this work. I was hired on March 10th. I filed the report 11 days later. I was deposed on April 10th. And if you don't know the word deposed, what that means is that the other side gets a specified amount of time, in this case 7 hours, to ask you as many questions as they want to learn about what you're likely to say in the courtroom. So this is part of the discovery process. So I was deposed for 7 hours on April 10th. In mid-April, I submitted my direct testimony. That is the DOJ asking me questions, and I provided answers. And then I was scheduled to testify in court on May 4th. So on April 30th, I went to Washington, D.C. I went to the Department of Justice offices to basically prepare for being cross-examined by the tobacco industry on March 4th. And as I arrived on April 30th, this fairly young attorney, very brilliant guy, but very young, sat down across from me. It was a Saturday morning. And when I had first met him on March 10th, he had a habit of calling me Professor Bazerman. I have this distinct memory of saying, I really prefer if you call me Max. And he said, I'll try Professor Bazerman. And that was suggesting I was having a hard time getting that through. But by the end of March, he called me Max. But on April 30th, as he sat down across the table from me, he said to me, Professor Bazerman, my ears perked up because we had switched to Max. He said, Professor Bazerman, the Department of Justice requests that you amend your testimony to note that it would not be relevant if any of the following 4 legal conditions existed. And then he read me a bunch of legalese that I didn't come close to understand. And he concluded with, do you so amend your testimony? And I said to him, now, we've been working together for a number of weeks, and you know me well enough to know that I didn't understand what you just said. And that if I did understand what you just said, I would say no to it. So why would I potentially say yes to your request? And he said to me, because if you don't amend your testimony, there's a significant chance my superiors will be eliminating you from this case before you testify on Wednesday. Now at this point, I had spent 166 hours working for the Department of Justice. I was being paid, but for a variety of reasons, I had made a commitment to donate all my money to charity. So I've been grew committed to this case. My dad and my sister both had significant cancer issues that were potentially related to cancer, to tobacco. I don't like the tobacco industry. And I kind of got the sense I was being threatened, but by someone I loved. And I said, I don't amend my testimony. And he smiled and said, good, then let's prepare in case you're still on the case on Wednesday. And we went back to preparation. That session ended. I was not eliminated from the case. I did testify on May 4th, and I'm going to skip a little bit of this and tell you, life was busy. I was really, really busy, like busier than I had ever been in my lifetime. And this episode on Saturday morning continued to bother me. But I was busy, and I went back to work. I went back to my obligations at Harvard, and life went on. All right. Now I'm going to come back to that episode, but until I do, and while I ask you some questions, I want you to be thinking about the strange request that I received to amend my testimony based on conditions that I didn't even understand, and the person asking me to amend my testimony knew I didn't understand what he was saying. Okay. All right. Okay, is this better? Thank you all. Apologize. Okay, so enough with my dilemma, at least for a while. Here's yours. You have a job as an investment advisor. And you have a client who wants your advice on which of 4 funds to invest in. Now you'll see at the bottom is the S&P 500. That's basically the large company US stock market over the last 9 years. And your client is not interested in you recommending that. She could decide that on her own. She wants to know which of the other 4 funds to invest in. And you're going to pick one. We're going to do this by hand raising, so get ready to pick one. One is that green fund called the Tobacco Trade Investment Fund, for those of you who are bold despite what I just talked about. Then there's kind of the rust-colored Alpha Investment Fund. And then there's the Fortitude Fund in purple. And then there's the Spiky Power Trade Fund. Now your client has a long-term investment perspective and has a moderate tolerance for risk. And she wants to know which of these funds do you recommend. Okay. I can give you another 8 seconds, and then we'll find out your preferences. Okay. How many of you are bold and brave and are going with the tobacco trade fund? No takers. Alpha Investments, the rest color. We got somebody there. How about that Purple Fortitude? That seems pretty popular. And the Power Trade Fund. Okay, so we got one at Power Trade, we got one on Alpha, maybe a couple who didn't vote, but the vast majority of you picked Fortitude. Is that a fair summary of what we just saw? Okay, now my next question to you, particularly to the business majors if you're here, is there something wrong with one of these funds? Yes, please.
The power trade seems very volatile.
Yep, volatile. Okay, and that sounds fair. Anything else that seems wrong? Yeah, please.
Fortitude seems a bit too predictable.
Okay, now, so we may have all politics majors or religion majors, philosophy majors, but if I asked a group of business school students, can you dramatically outperform the market over an extended period of time with absolutely no volatility? They would answer that question, that's not possible. This gentleman's shaking his head, no, that's not possible. Okay. So, and we could go into the technical arguments for it, but anybody with a course in finance should know the fact that you cannot dramatically outperform the market with little to no volatility, what our professor just suggested to us. But that's what Fortitude was doing. And I also want you to notice, by the way, Professor, did you pick Fortitude on the first part of the question?
I did.
You did, okay, so you're my favorite kind of respondent. And my co-author of Blind Spots, Ann Penbridle, has this wonderful term, ethical fading. And when I ask the question, what do you invest in? People look for high returns and low volatility. And what fades is the question of ethics or conceivability. Because most of you, in fact, invested in Bernie Madoff, and you've lost all of your money. Okay, so I was basically showing you 9 years of performance of Bernie Madoff. And again, many of you can take comfort in the fact that you've never had a finance class. Not all of you, but some of you can take comfort in that. But there were so many people who were in the investment world, who had significant finance background, significant quantitative background, who had access to the data, who simply didn't notice. And what I want to suggest is that there will always be some bad guys out there. And if we had noticed what Madoff was doing wrong far earlier, the damage that he would have caused would have been trivial by comparison. So can we notice things that are different? All right. Now, the next thing I want to show you is what I consider to be the greatest movie ever made. You might not agree with me, but it only lasts 18 seconds, so your disagreement won't last that long. And let me describe this video in a little detail before giving you your assignment. The video was made in the 1970s. The film is a bit grainy, making your task harder. In fact, I'm not going to show you one video, I'm going to show you 2 videos at the same time. One of the videos has 3 players in white t-shirts passing a basketball to each other. The other video has 3 players in dark t-shirts passing a different basketball to each other. Now there's a few things I want to tell you before I give you your task. First, I want to tell you that no player in a white t-shirt will pass a basketball to a player in a dark t-shirt. And no player in a dark t-shirt will pass a basketball to a player in a white t-shirt. They can't. They're not even in the same video. The other thing I want to tell you is afterwards I'll stick around and I'm happy to talk about anything you want to talk about except one topic. I will never be talking to you about the players in the dark t-shirts. They are there simply to interfere with your task, and your task is to count the passes among the players in the white t-shirts during the 18 seconds of the video. Everybody with me? All right, now I'm going to go over to this computer, and I'm going to hope that it's going to do what I want it to do. There we go. We're good.
Okay, 1.
Okay, now that video ended with a pass in the air, including the pass that was in the air. The correct answer was? Okay, the answer was 11. I promise. Okay. Did anyone see anything unusual? What did you see?
A woman walked across the...
A what?
A woman walked, I think, across the...
One of the players?
No, someone else.
You saw a woman walk across. What was she doing?
Walking.
Walking. Did the rest of you see her? You saw her too. What was she doing? Holding an umbrella. Were you two drinking before the talk? No, okay. All right, now the rest of you, you've heard these nice people. They look like students here. Do you think there was a woman with an umbrella who walked across? All right, let's take another look. This time, I want you to not bother to count. I want you to sit back and simply watch what I think is the best video ever made. I promise it's the exact same video.
Okay, 1.
Did anybody not see her the second time? Okay, now, some of you are thinking,
Okay.
some of you are thinking, what's your point? You told me to count passes, not look for women with umbrellas. Okay, and you have a valid basis. But what I can tell you is that this video was made by Ulrich Neisser in the 1970s. He's a psychology professor. He was a psychology professor at Cornell, recently passed away. I didn't see it until 2003, and I was in the audience, and my colleague, Professor Benaji, in the Harvard Psychology Department, gave a talk where she showed this video. And I'm proud to tell you I correctly counted passes as 11. Okay, and then she showed the video again after someone in the back of the room mentioned something about a woman with an umbrella. And that woman with the umbrella has been my obsession for the last 13 years. And I actually think that noticing stuff is important in life. And the more I sort of thought about it, the more it made sense to me that I would be good at counting the passes and I would be lousy at noticing the woman with the umbrella. Throughout my life, I've been narrow-minded and focused. Okay, some people have other ways to describe this, but generally, I'm pretty good at getting my work done, focusing on what's in front of me. But the number of times that I've been to a restaurant with Marla, who I'm married to for a very long period of time, where as we leave the restaurant, she tells me about the lives of the people at the tables around us. You know, of course I say, well, weren't you paying attention to me? But it's always been stunning to me that she could pick up peripheral information that wouldn't remotely occur to me to even listen for. And the question is do you want to focus or do you want to notice? And my answer is both. Okay, you want to focus most of the time, but you probably want to pick up your head and look around on occasion to notice critical threats, opportunities, challenges that exist. Yes, sir?
You know, I recently read a paper, a short paper, a professor's paper, that suggested ability.
Yeah.
And when it goes right to the heart of what's going on,
Yeah.
because you explain what to look for,
Yeah.
but the outside of it, we didn't notice. I think that's outstanding.
Yeah, so
that they noticed that. So we're talking about suggestibility.
I think you could accuse me of being manipulative.
No, I wasn't suggesting.
But I said you could, not that you were. But I do my best to make you really want to count the passes correctly. Okay, and the more focused you are, the harder it is to pick up peripheral information. Right. Now I want to tell you about a simulation that I run with MBA students and executive students pretty often. The issue that we present in this case, it's a case called Carter Racing, is that there's a race car team, and they make money by winning races. I think you have a racetrack just up above Concord, if I remember correctly. And they have a very good race car. They've had a very good season. They've been in the top 5 in 12 out of 24 races. But the problem that they have is that it's really cold today, the last race of the season. It's a really valuable race if they would come in the top 5 again, but it would be a very bad race to blow their engine because you're going to be on national TV and it would affect sponsorship to a dramatic degree. And one of the mechanics thinks that temperature is a problem. And when it's colder, it's a bigger problem. And with the temperature being outside today at being 40 degrees at race time, that's too cold to race and they should pull out of the race. Okay. And he presents this data that shows the 7 races out of the 24 where they've had a problem. And the question is, should they proceed or not? I want you to think about what you would do next. And I'm not going to put you on the spot to answer this one. This is the hard one. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to tell you is that Carter Racing was adapted from the 1980s decision to launch the Challenger. And the night before we launched the Challenger with the first teacher in space, the 7 astronauts on board, that one of the engineers at Morton Thiokol, the engine company, had presented this data and said, I think it's too cold to launch the Challenger because of the 24 prior launches, there have been 7 where we've had significant engine problems having to do with something called an O-ring. And he speculated that cold temperatures caused O-ring problems. And there was a debate the night before arguing about this data. And what's fascinating is that nobody asked what I think you'll conclude in retrospect is a pretty obvious question. So we're talking about Morton Thiokol and NASA engineers and scientists. They argued over whether you can see a pattern in this data. And nobody had asked about the temperature for the 17 launches where there had been no problem. If you do, you get this chart. And if you quickly integrate it, you can see that there's 24 races, and the reds are the problem. Now do you see a problem? Now all of a sudden people see a problem. And if you don't like graphs and you like charts, it turns out 4 out of 4 below 65 were problematic, dramatically different than at higher temperatures. And in fact, NASA launched the Challenger when if anybody in that discussion had said, can I simply see the other 17 data points? If they had noticed that they were missing something, that could have dramatically affected their decision. And I would suggest to you that most of you haven't launched space shuttles, but you have been influenced by what data people present to you in a meeting. And part of our job is to not just take the data that we're given, but to ask what data would we actually want to make a wiser decision. Okay, so back to my problem and my tobacco story. So I already told you, sort of after I testified in court, life got busy. The case ended in early June. Now, the judge wasn't going to make a decision for another year, but the courtroom proceedings ended in early June. And on June 17th, I woke up in London, England. I was working with another organization. And I woke up at 5 a.m. with that jet lag, wide awake, I can't believe I'm so awake, it's 5 a.m. feeling. I'm not going to be able to fall back asleep. So I opened up my notebook computer on June 17th, 2005. And I went to the New York Times webpage. So I hope that that's not a political comment. I know they're not supposed to be here. They're not supposed to make political comments, but New York Times webpage provides something. I go to the front page of the New York Times, and on the front page is an article about a guy named Matthew Myers. Now, I now know Matthew Myers, but as of the time I read this article, I knew who he was, but I didn't know him. And at the time, he was the president of an organization called Tobacco Free Kids. And he was one of the world's leading anti-tobacco advocates. He had also been an expert witness in the same case that I was an expert witness in. And what the article said was that Matthew Myers had come forward with the accusation that Robert McCollum, who at the time was the #2 official in the US Department of Justice, had tried to tamper with his testimony. And then I read that Robert McCollum had asked him to amend his testimony if any of the following 4 legal conditions existed, and threatened that if he didn't amend his testimony, he might be removed from the case. And as I'm reading this, it's like, okay, I've seen this story before. And in the pit of my stomach, my essential feeling is, I think I was supposed to do something when I got that strange request on April 30th. Okay? I think I had a civic obligation to do something given how peculiar the request I received from the Department of Justice was. But it's now 5 a.m. in London, and I think I'm supposed to do something now too, but it's unclear what to do. It's midnight back in Washington and Boston. And I know that in about 3 hours, I have a full day of commitments ahead of me. So what I did, wide awake, is I called up Marla. I mentioned Marla earlier. And at the time, Marla knew more about Washington than I did. And I called up Marla and told her I had something important to tell her, that I needed her to be awake. And then I kind of brought her up to date with what I just told you. And I said, so I think I'm supposed to do something, but I don't know what it is, and I'm busy all day. So would you mind figuring it out for me? And when I get back to the hotel this evening, I'll call you. She said, okay, if I can go back to sleep, I'll do this. I said, good night. Okay. So I go spend the day with another organization. I get back to my hotel room at about 5 p.m., so 12 hours later. So it's now noon, Boston and Washington. And I call Marla, and I say, what's up? And she says, I don't have time for chit-chat. You have calls to make. There's an organization in Washington called the Government Accountability Project. The president is Louis Clark. He's your lawyer. Call him at this number. He'll be representing you in this matter. As soon as you're done talking to him, here's the number of the Washington Post reporter who will be covering your story. I did what Marla told me to do. Okay. And in fact, if you Google Max Bazerman tobacco, you can find the story. You can find the letters that congressional leaders wrote to demand an investigation of the Bush DOJ. Okay. But I still continued to feel, boy, did I blow it on April 30th. Now, what's interesting about this is
that when I tell this story to business people, they tend to let me off the hook. They tend to say, you didn't know what was going on, you didn't have the expertise, you didn't do anything wrong, you didn't change your testimony. And they're very nice to me. When I tell journalists about the same story, their reaction is exactly the opposite. Their reaction is, we know that when you can't figure out what's going on, that's where the best stories are. So there's this investigative mindset. When what you're seeing doesn't make sense, that's when you have a civic obligation to go look harder. And I think that that's completely and totally correct. I think that I really blew it. And the Marlowe part of the story really makes matters worse, because I could argue, but I didn't know what to do. But Marlowe showed within a few hours you could call people in DC who would understand what's going on and identify alternative strategies to a remarkable extent. All right. Now, some of my problems have been personal. Some of my problems have been more fun. But there's other things that we want to notice in life. One of the things that's going on in governments around the world, starting in the UK, is a movement called nudging, or behavioral insights. And some of you may have seen the book by Thaler and Sunstein called Nudge. But the basic idea is, if we use the essence of psychology and behavioral economics, we can identify ways to adjust the behavior of citizens to make them both more effective and also more ethical. So we know how to get people to save for retirement. And a quick answer that Dick Thaler figured out a long time ago is, rather than having people sign up to enroll in retirement plans, start them off enrolled and allow them to sign out if they don't want to be enrolled. That the default matters a lot. Countries that have you sign up to be an organ donor get rates between about 5 and 40%. Countries that by default make you an organ donor and allow you to sign a form saying, I don't want to be an organ donor, get donation rates of about 99%. So we know lots about how to nudge behavior. And I want to show you just one that I've worked on. And by the way, what I'm about to show you is my most conceptually trivial research of my life. And I'm going to demonstrate how trivial it is. All right. So I want to talk to you briefly about two kinds of promises. So before you go to court, you raise your hand, well, once you're in court, you raise your hand and you say, I'm about to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. A more common thing we do is we sign a form saying, I told you the truth. Now I want you to notice that there's two differences. The left is oral, the right is written. But the left is before, and the right is after. And I want to eliminate what a psychologist would call a confound in the design. So I want you to imagine you're designing a tax form. Maybe it's the US tax form, and it turns out that some people lie a little bit, and you'd rather they didn't lie. So what's a better idea? To have people sign first saying, I'm going to tell you the truth, and then fill out the form? Or does it make more sense to fill out the form and at the end ask them to sign saying, I told you the truth? So we'll call that before and after. How many of you think after the way we do it is better? How many of you think before is better? Okay. Before is a winner. Okay, so we sort of have demonstrated this in a laboratory where basically we have students earn money by solving math puzzles. The puzzle is find the two numbers that add up to 10. But then we have them fill out a form and tell us how many puzzles they solved. And here's a shocking reality of my university. Some students who we hire to go through this task, in order to get more money, they lie to us. They tend to lie by a little bit. So they included the puzzle that they were about to solve, or the one that they made a mistake on, but they know which two numbers actually add up to 10. So they lie a little bit, a lot of them. And what we've been able to find is that if you change the signature from the bottom to the top, we reduced cheating in the laboratory by about half. Okay? I don't think we can reduce cheating by half on the tax form, but I am confident that we can reduce cheating, because we not only have that in the lab, we have that on reporting your odometer reading. This is another thing where people lie. You get a card from your insurance company saying how many miles are on your odometer, and if you put in a lower amount, your premium will go down because you're not driving as much. And people do this often. By moving the signature to the top rather than the bottom, dramatic effects. And we now have the US government doing this on corporate payments, and we have nations around the globe who are moving the signature. But you need to notice that there's something wrong. And the quick thing you want to notice is after someone's lied, the fact that you ask them to sign it doesn't lead them to undo it. But if you have them commit to telling the truth, integrity is more in their minds, and on average, that seems to have a remarkable effect. Okay, now, so 2 last slides. I'm going to skip some others. So what are you supposed to do about all this? First is to put noticing on your agenda. The leadership guru, Warren Bennis, had a great term. He was first-class noticer. And he stole it from a work of fiction about a guy named Harry Trellerman, who Saul Bellows called a first-class noticer. And what Warren Bennis argued was what leaders need to be are first-class noticers, to see threats, challenges, and opportunities. And to the earlier comment, which I concur with, as a focuser, do I want to give up my focusing? No. But I also want to occasionally pick up my head and notice critical opportunities. It's good to take an outsider's perspective. When you're in the middle of an intense decision, it's very hard to notice. Okay? You want to, if you're in a leadership position, you want to audit your organization and ask, are you creating the environment where people are likely to notice? I talked about the second number 3 there. When something's wrong, go figure out what it is rather than returning to other issues. And I'm going to skip predictable surprises because I'm looking at the clock. And I simply want to close by showing you a photo. And this photo, well, first of all, you'll see that this young man has very big, thick glasses, a very nice set of hair. This is a fabric that the young members of the audience will not know, but it was called Kiana. And it was a fabric that if you spilled anything on, it had the nice property that it would slide right off. A lot of people don't find it all that attractive, but that's another topic. The last thing I want to tell you is that that's me. And I think I'm 17 or 18. I was, and my other career path in life was I was a very good card player. And I'm playing cards in this photo. And when you're playing cards and you want to win as opposed to just having fun with your friends, either because it's for a lot of money or in this case I'm playing in a bridge tournament, you really want to pay attention to a very small set of things. The other players in 52 cards. And if you're paying attention to information in the periphery, it's probably going to take away from your ability to play cards well. And I think that part of my limitation on noticing comes from the fact that I was a very, very good card player. And I think that that helped train in the notion of focusing to a remarkable extent. Now what I want to suggest to you is being a good citizen and being a good leader may not be a lot like playing cards at all. And the importance of noticing may be far more critical. And particularly for those of us who are good focusers, I think we want to think about whether we want to occasionally stop and try to notice and to be more effective. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to talk about anything you'd like to talk about. Please.
Professor, your reflections relative to the tobacco case. What are your reflections on why you didn't react in it?
Yeah. So I don't think that I was. I don't think I was nervous or afraid to speak up. I think it's a situation that a lot of us are in. We notice something's wrong, but if we don't know what to do, we're more likely to let it drift. Okay? Now, so this is a peculiar industry, because this is an industry that has a fairly nasty history in a variety of ways. And I, in fact, remember when after I was hired on March 10th, at the next meeting I had with the DOJ attorneys, and by the way, the people on the litigation team, I thought the world of. I thought they were terrific people. The problem that I encountered came from above. But I remember within the second meeting, they told me, oh, by the way, we don't mean to scare you, and they don't shoot anybody anymore, but they do follow you. I said, who follows me? They said, the tobacco industry. I said, well, if they're not going to shoot me, why are they going to follow me? They said, because if you engage in any inappropriate behavior, it might show up in the courtroom as evidence of your lack of reliability as a human being. I said, well, that's a nice helpful hint, but I did notice that they didn't tell me that in advance. But sort of, I had been through that period. I don't know whether I was followed or not. I wasn't afraid to speak out. I just think I didn't know what to do. And I was overwhelmed with life, and I'll skip sort of everything that was going on in life, that I just didn't feel like I had time to figure it out. But I think it was a tragic error. April 30th was a Saturday. I think on May 2nd, I should have been calling people I knew in DC who could have helped me figure it out in a remarkably small period of time. But I think that most of us, if we saw someone taking the money out of the cash register, we would say something. But when we see something that looks wrong, but we can't quite figure it out, I think we don't have this investigative mindset of figuring out the next step, and I think we should. Yeah. So I present it to you as what I think of as one of my greatest failures.
Hi. I wanted to ask you, I guess, about, so the man who asked you to amend your report, I guess?
Yeah.
Did he do something as well? Because when he know that something was wrong too, so I don't know if you know what he did.
So I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm going to speculate, because I would bet on being right, and it was really his career that kept me from trying to learn more. So in brief, the head of the litigation team was headed by a woman by the name of Sharon Eubanks, E-U-B-A-N-K-S. She wrote a book about all this called Bad Acts. I'm worth about a page and a half out of a 300-page book, and which seems pretty fair to me. Sharon Eubanks was the head of the litigation team. African-American woman, my age, so at the time she was 50. One of the most amazing human beings I've ever met. She entered this case with a 30-0 record for the Department of Justice. She had never lost a case. And the person who I've written about this story a couple of times, the person who was sitting across from me was a 28-year-old attorney, and who I mentioned was brilliant, but quite new. And I think that he was nervous about his own political situation. I'm pretty confident that Robert McCullum either directed him directly to ask me to amend my testimony, or ask someone else to ask him to have me amend my testimony. And I have this very distinct memory that when I said no, he smiled. And he also gave me the hint when he started the session by saying, Professor Bazerman. Okay? And I think all of that was intentional. So he was doing what he was told to do, so he couldn't be fired for insubordination. But in fact, he did not want me to corrupt my testimony. Now, so Sharon, if you want to know more about the case, the book Bad Acts describes how the political appointees had tried to corrupt this case throughout the process. So you had a hardworking legal team who were actively prosecuting the tobacco industry, and you had a variety of political appointees, including the number 2 official in the U.S. Department of Justice, who worked for one of the law firms that was representing one of the tobacco firms in this case, who was obviously quite involved in trying to make the case weaker in a wide variety of ways, far beyond my own testimony. I also don't mean to overstate my testimony. I don't think I was that important in this case. For me, it's just sort of a reflection of, I want to be like Matt Myers, and I want to speak up when I see wrongdoing in the world. Professor.
Thank you. One of your suggestions at the end was quite broad, so this is a broad question. How do we set up our organizations so that we notice these things, so that we encourage people to come forward?
Yeah.
I'm thinking particularly in the last couple of weeks, this issue with Wells Fargo. They set up their pay structure so that people would sign folks up for accounts they didn't need. So, but how to just generally as an organization set themselves up so they
So my guess is that I could turn around and ask you that question because you're thinking about the topic of business ethics and you have a variety of answers. But since I'm up here and you asked the question, I'll do my best. So you started with incentive systems. So do people have the incentive to speak up? Sort of what happens to people who do speak up? Are they rewarded or punished? One company that I've done a lot of work for, so I'm not claiming I'm unbiased, but this company, a Fortune 20 company, so a very large company, they created a video, and the video lasts an hour. And it has 4 senior vice presidents, each tell their story for 15 minutes. And all 4 stories have the same theme. When they were young, new to the organization, and something was wrong, and their boss wouldn't do anything about it, they went above their boss's head. And they're now senior vice presidents. And the company takes pride in saying, we have a credo, we believe in our credo, we want you to follow the credo, and if that means going against what your own boss would want, that's still what you're expected to do. And they sort of strengthen it with this video. Now this organization doesn't want to make that public, because generally if you claim to be a do-good organization, that increases the propensity of people to try to demonstrate that you're not a do-good organization. So this video is shown internally, not externally, and I saw it as part of sort of my consulting work with this organization. So I think that that's part of it. The other thing that I would think I would focus on is loyalty. And we think of loyalty as a very positive word, and obviously there's good things about loyalty. But I think extreme loyal organizations can really be barriers to people speaking up. So certainly if we think about either the Penn State story, or if we think about the Catholic Church story, the fact that there was wrongdoing isn't the big surprise. The bigger surprise, I think, is that there are so many people who had access to information and either didn't notice or noticed and didn't act. And I actually think the most common case was in the middle, kind of like my Washington story. They sort of saw something, but they didn't know what they saw. They didn't want to accuse somebody who might not be guilty. So what they did was they put their head in the sand. And I think that that's common. And I think the more loyalty becomes a core virtue, we have to be careful that it doesn't suppress people from doing what they should be doing, irrespective of their own organization. So those are at least a few responses.
Question about the basketball scenario that we looked at, and I guess you prefaced it by watch for this. But the reality is, if you just shown the video and said, "What did you see?" My guess is more people would probably say they saw the dramatic movement with the umbrella, rather than the passes between the white T-shirt players or the black T-shirt players. I guess in terms of organizations and leadership, how do you do it so that you have people who are looking for the white passes, the black passes, or the umbrellas?
Yeah, so a couple of ideas. A very old idea is in a group, assign somebody the role of devil's advocate. Okay? And don't view somebody who disagrees with you as your enemy. If your goal is to make a wise decision, view them as a different perspective and do your best to listen and incorporate. You can always reject it later on, but why not listen to it first? The other response is, I think, like the gentleman on the left, on my left, you're alluding to the fact that the way I presented may have manipulated your result, and I think you're entirely correct. I would simply suggest that every time someone gets up in a classroom, whether it's this professor or a leader or a group member, and has already created a PowerPoint presentation, what they put in and what they don't put in the PowerPoint presentation can have a dramatic effect on how you're going to see things. And if you're making an important decision, you want to ask, what data do I want, rather than what data did they give me? Yes, please.
Wasn't that also the problem with the O-rings, where the Morton Thiokol executive said, you need to prove to us that it is not safe as compared to us proving that it is safe?
Yeah, so the Challenger story, what you're saying is exactly right. So there's a movie called The Challenger. It's about 2.5 hours long. It's a terrible movie, except for the segments that show the meetings. And there's a guy named Frank Malloy who works for NASA, who wants to launch. And there's this guy named Roger Beaujolais from Morton Thiokol who's the engineer who really doesn't want to launch. And one of the things that Malloy does an amazing job of is he changes the default. And I talked about defaults before on organ donation and retirement savings. And what Malloy does is he changes the role of the discussion. We launch unless you can give me good reason not to. And defaults end up having kind of a tremendous effect. That said, I would argue, had Roger Beaujolais, who's the good guy in the story, but had he shown up with the charts that I showed you, the decision could have been dramatically different. It probably would have been dramatically different, but we'll never know that for sure. I think my time is up, but I appreciate talking to all of you and hearing your comments, and I'd be delighted to talk to you more after the session. Thank you very much.